Value-Based Engineering, a lecture by Professor Dr. Sarah Spiekermann. What values are? An educational program developed at Vienna University of Economics and Business.
Welcome to my lecture on what values are. An ontological account with a view to system engineering. Values seem to be at the core of cultures and of the innovations brought forth by them. They allow people and organizations to frame the meaning and ends of their actions. For this reason, values are central for an enlightened and responsible development of technologies. But what are values? So how can they be defined and how can they be instantiated in a computer system? In economics, the value of something is equated with money. But this equating of value or values merely with money confounds that money is only a tool embroidered with a symbolic exchange value that facilitates the exchange of goods that are the actual bearers of value. So what I want to elaborate on hereafter is the nature of real values that are born by goods and services. Defining values is not an easy endeavor in our modern times because values are not tangibly given and therefore cannot be physically measured, inspected, or touched. Instead, they force contemporary science to venture into invisible symbolic meaning. A challenging endeavor, seeing that our modern science is all about measurement. That said, the philosophical value literature is rich of investigations, and especially Max Scheler's groundbreaking work on the formalism in ethics and non-formal ethics of values provides us with the soundest understanding of the phenomenon at this point in time. The biggest stumbling block towards a definition of values is the idea that values are individual preferences, primarily originating within subjects themselves. That is, within people's thoughts. Modern definitions of values, such as the one in the Oxford English Dictionary, seem to support this Cartesian view, which equalizes being with human thought. The dictionary defines values as principles or standards of a person or society, the personal or societal judgments of what is valuable and important in life. Other timely philosophical definitions of values seem to define values along the same line as lasting convictions or matters that people feel should be strived for in general and not just for themselves to be able to lead a good life or realize a good society. This idea that values are personal judgments or convictions does not hold true, though, when analyzing them phenomenologically. Take the value of privacy as an example. Many people might be convinced that privacy has ceased to be important, especially in times where personal data sharing is ubiquitous in digital communication. A society like China today might even establish a norm of citizen surveillance and thereby refute the value of privacy. But such personal preferences or societal norms do not make the value of privacy disappear. In contrast, we speak more of it than ever before. The fact that the value of privacy continues to be discussed no matter anyone's convictions or social norms is a straightforward proof that values seem to exist a priori and independent of an individual's or group's judgment. As Max Scheler famously put it in his opus magnum on material value ethics and in critical deconstruction of Kant's subjectivism, quote, "The ego is neither the point of departure for the apprehension nor the product of essences." Presuming that the ontologically independent nature of values should be respected in their definition, I want to turn to Nikolai Hartmann's value definition as principles of the ought to be. Hartmann used in his moral philosophy, used this definition of principles of the ought to be in his moral philosophy, where he also ascribed a supertemporal existence to values, likening them to Platonian ideas. Hartmann's definition caters to understanding values as a priori given essences that are independent of people's judgment, and they represent an ideal towards which we strive. Half a century after Hartmann, Harvard anthropologist Clyde Kluckhohn grounded his definition by conceiving of values as conceptions of the desirable that influence the selection from available modes, means, and ends of action. Unlike Hartmann, Kluckhohn's definition can accommodate for the observation that values do something with those who perceive them. They trigger emotional responsivity towards or away from the value bearer. Using the word conception, though, is still not perfect. It can be misread to accommodate for the kind of subjectivism that I have just refuted above with Scheler. After all, concepts are originating in human thought rather than in the world, and they are like a theoretic model that humans can make up to understand the world. As there can again be personal judgments. A model is not the same thing as the phenomenon that underlies it. Phenomena like values are disclosed through being in the world, as Heidegger might have said, and are therefore not reducible to a conception. That values manifest in the world is proven by the fact that animals can also perceive values relevant to their respective life form. An example is the nutrition value of something they eat. Like humans, they have the potential to feel what is good, and that's so without concepts and without judgment. Against this background, I avoid the word conception or conviction or judgment in my own proposed definition of values. Instead, I define values as phenomena disclosing the degree of desirability of something or someone, influencing the selection of available modes, means, and ends of action. By using the verb to disclose in this definition, I want to signal the mediating nature of values. Disclosure requires a counterpart. Values unfold their existence only through the co-perception of the observer. When people are inattentive, inexperienced, distracted, or a stranger to a respective value milieu, they easily forgo value potentials in front of them. They may elapse the beauty of something or the reliability of something. In such cases, value dispositions may very well be embedded in a person or thing, but they lie dormant and are not actually actualized in perception. In the design of computer systems, this happens very often. When functionality for the benefit of the user is buried deep down in the menu structure, but nobody sees them. Why is such a rigorous value definition actually important? The close examination of the terminological details of the value definition might seem like principle writing. Yet an ontologically misguided understanding of values can create more confusion and harm than one might imagine. In fact, misunderstanding values can lead to poor policy making, poor business models, as well as suboptimal expectations on what makes a system valuable. In the EU Commission's proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, for instance, the term union values, or European Union values, is referred to over a dozen times. As a result, some might think that values should be built into systems so that they can then have these in their design somewhere. But building values physically into a system seems impossible. No auditor will ever be able to find values tangibly in a system that have them somewhere concretely, because phenomenologically they are invisible entities. So legally requiring technology providers to build union values into AI puts company at a risk of continuously breaching the law, not due to their unwillingness to respect values, but because the regulator verbally institutionalizes an invisible phenomenon as a compliance goal. How can companies prove that they build a system with union values in mind if these are not visible? One comfortable philosophical definition of values therefore avoids this dilemma. It has been called the intentional history account of value embedding. Avoiding the phenomenologically independent nature of values that I just outlined, this Cartesian I have definition of value is that a system has a value once it is intentionally designed so by the engineer. For example, when an engineer really wants a system to respect user privacy and builds it with a privacy by design approach, then these I have definition scholars would argue that the system has the value of privacy automatically embedded in it, because the designer wanted it there. The valuable intention of the designer is then what counts, also what makes the value. And indeed, I also believe that having good intentions and translating them into a system design is hugely important for the propensity of a system to later bear the intended value. Many technical quality standards work this way. Engineering organization proves through documentation that they comply with certain process steps in the setup of a system, which are then presumed to ensure that value materializes. However, Schiller already outlined over 100 years ago in his scattering criticism of Kantian subjectivism that there is a substantial difference between a good and rational intention to do something and the ability and effectiveness in doing so. And this is what ultimately is important for companies. Customers cannot live by good designer intentions only if these are not playing out in the real experience of the product. Moreover, when things go wrong, policies alone showing good designer intentions are like a drop in the ocean. Too often, intended values simply do not unfold as expected, not even when customers properly follow use manuals. The history of product use shows that intended value is often ignored. Instead, some completely unexpected values are suddenly appreciated. And since such dynamics are the norm for new products and services, the norm when they are introduced, it seems questionable to ground the existence of values, by definition, exclusively on designer intentions. Such a definition of values ignores both the effectiveness by which the designer's intentions were then effectively embedded in a system through respective value dispositions, and it ignores also the role of the system user necessary to co-perceive the value intended. Taken together, companies and regulators seem well advised to presume value existence, not only due to well-documented compliance with a value-sensitive design process and good designer intentions, but to observe the real values unfolding as a result of the system's use. But what are real values materializing? Some business consultants say that values can be equalized with product features put at the center of a business model. Alexander Osterweiler, a wonderful consultant, for example, describes in a public lecture that the value proposition of Tesla car is as follows. The value proposition: the car, a powerful battery, a lot of space in the car, luxury image, fuel for free, upgrades, great design, power range, and safety. Even a layman sees, though, that strictly speaking, that in this list there is only one value, and that is safety. All the other points he mentions are merely prerequisite or dispositions that must be in place in order to create value qualities and values. For example, a high-performance battery, if excellently engineered, can support value qualities such as flexibility, time savings, and range, which in turn are prerequisite for that value which is actually bought. Yeah? Mobility. Upgrades are required only to increase the reliability of the car. And this in turn caters to safety. A lot of space is one disposition catering to comfort. But much more is needed to really make a car comfortable. In other words, anyone who uplifts mere features or a few components, like a battery or upgrades, to be a value, has not yet understood the ontological status of values. He or she risks to confuse actually technical preconditions of a value with the value themselves, with values themselves, and thereby dramatically underestimate what is actually required to create value. In Heidegger's terminology, one risks to prematurely raise stuff to be goods, and thereby misleading customers and executives alike. That said, material dispositions catering to values in a system are, of course, important. They are the prerequisites of value creation. Yet, what role they play exactly, both for the corporate value proposition as well as for the engineering, can only be understood after we delve a little bit deeper into understanding the value phenomenon. Let me start by trying to understand the difference between value dispositions and value qualities. People and things cannot have values in terms of possessing them, but they can bear them, they can carry them, they can hold them if they are equipped with the right value dispositions. A value disposition is the capacity, characteristic, or property in a value bearer that physically provides the potential to enable or inhibit one or more values. Value dispositions are what legal compliance officers can indeed tangibly find in the system, in the computer system. He or she inspects the computer system and finds that data stored on a hard drive is or is not encrypted, for example. In the software, he or she will see whether encryption is symmetric or unsymmetric, what kind of encryption algorithm is used, and what key lengths. And seeing these dispositional value facts, these value dispositions, the auditor can make a value judgment on whether the system is secure or not. Note that this value judgment is not subjective, though, or a personal preference. Whether an algorithm can be considered secure or not depends on best available techniques and standard recommendations for encryption at a specific time and in a specific or for a specific context. And these two and the milieu experience of an auditor in judging security issues make that someone sees the factual properties of a system and based on these factual properties of the system either considers it as secure or not. Let's give the auditors a name Annie. Annie has privately been part of a hacker community since her teenage years. And she has inhaled this milieu of extremely serious security speak. So Annie's long-term life form has led her to develop a relatively elaborate security knowledge. As she audits a bank's encryption system, she may be relatively tougher in her judgment on the system's security dispositions than an alternative editor, Paul, who has just passed his first security officer certificate, but who has not spent his life in the domain. Annie might find the encryption key not strong enough, for instance. She might disagree with Paul, who has learned that the law accepts 128-bit key lengths as adequate for meeting the legal security standards. She finds this, however, not secure enough for bank customers and therefore recommends the bank to use 256-bit key lengths. And this judgment of the right security level is not her personal judgment, even though she expresses it as a subject. Instead, her judgment on how to ensure the bank's security would probably be shared by her peers from the hacker community. And it is intersubjectively true and would also bear some objective truth and also bear some objective truths about security in this context. That said, the inexperienced Paul does not share in Annie's and the hacker community's value judgment as a security judgment. And what the example shows is that the given value dispositions in the system, also here the key lengths and the algorithm symmetry, are obviously being valued in different ways. So are we back to subjectivity and preferences then? Also should Annie have her opinion and Paul has his and both are equally right and respectable? Certainly not. Annie and Paul differ in how they evaluate the relationship between the banking system's factual dispositions and the security quality potential this entails. Yet this relationship can be analyzed quite objectively. First, the potential for the system to be considered secure is objectively backbound to tangible system dispositions. A longer key is harder to decipher than a shorter one and therefore has a provenly higher quality potential for security. A symmetric encryption system is harder to attack than an asymmetric encryption system is harder to attack than a symmetric one, and therefore has an objectively higher security quality potential as well. Hence, the material properties of this thing, the value dispositions, enable or hinder value quality potentials to a different degree. Secondly, context factors have a relatively stable influence on value potentials as well. The context of banking, for instance, is specifically vulnerable when it comes to protecting customer security because attackers' gains can be so large when the security fails. Banks therefore see particularly strong attacks that often benefit from computer processing power with deciphering, that is at ease with deciphering a weak encryption. The social constituency of the banking context makes that the materialization of security requires particularly sophisticated protection properties, as elaborate, tangible value dispositions to resist the attack actions. An expert like Annie simultaneously integrates these conditions in her value judgment. The backbound knowledge on whether system dispositions, as encryption, etc., are substantial for actualizing a value, and the knowledge on the contextually co-determined value unfolding is what she has all present. It is hence not her personal conviction that dominate the security judgment, but objectively given instances in the world. And it is likely that if Paul had the same experience, knowledge, or milieu that Annie has, he would reach the same conclusion as she does. So with experience, both are likely to converge with high probability towards a shared value truth. Now, is Paul an inferior auditor? What is it that makes his value quality judgment poorer than Annie's? Annie is able to simultaneously integrate the backbound and contextual knowledge relevant for the value quality judgment. It is not that she mentally weighs each one of the value dispositions that she sees for a fact and then calculates some security value score. Even though some representationalists might theoretically describe the cognitive exercise of valuation in this way, this is not what can be confirmed phenomenologically. Research in attention psychology, at least since the 1960s, has shown that only beginners in the field, like Paul in this case, need to consciously call up their declarative knowledge on something, like the crypto dispositions, and then cognitively weigh the facts that he observes to reach a conclusion or initiate an action. In contrast, experts like Annie who have learned a skill have procedural knowledge to act in a situation, or what Polanyi calls tacit knowledge. Phenomenologically, they have a skilled intuition to recognize one or several value qualities of a thing as a whole, and they've learned to tend to them. Similar to an experienced car driver using various gears automatically when accelerating the car. So does this intuitive, tacit knowledge, prone, holistic perception of value qualities that experts like Annie possess make them better assessors of value qualities? Yes, indeed. And there are at least two reasons for this. First, inexperienced beginners are running through the sequential stages of declarative knowledge application, and in doing so, their performance is typically slower and error-prone. In his accumulation of relevant security value dispositions, for instance, the inexperienced Paul is likely to make mistakes, not attending to some or forgetting about other issues, combining them in a suboptimal way, or falsely judging their relevance for ensuring security. And this can degrade his assessment of the given value quality. Secondly, Annie intuitively observes the security value qualities as wholes, or what attention researchers call chunks, or psychologists Gestalten. Annie acts vis-a-vis these mentally integrated wholes and is not only more efficient, as observed in attention research. Gestalt psychology outlines how wholes, also value wholes in this case, are typically greater than their parts. In a gestalt, it may, for instance, be the kind of arrangement of parts that makes a quality difference. And as Annie's expert knowledge allows her to recognize the gestalt of the bank's security qualities, she might therefore recognize issues that Paul could not even recognize if he wanted to. Summarizing these arguments, we can distinguish two ontological value layers for a thing like a computer system. The lower material layer of value dispositions that can be touched and inspected one by one, like the algorithm and the encryption chosen, and a higher layer of value qualities born by these dispositions, which present themselves as mental wholes. Let me now move towards our three-layered value ontology. In thinking about the two security auditors, Annie and Paul, we have seen that they are responsive in a more or less sophisticated way with what I have called value qualities. Value qualities that are to some extent objectively backbound to concrete value dispositions in a thing. What a security expert might have noticed, though, is that taking the encryption example, I only refer to one specific dimension of security, which is called confidentiality. Key length and asymmetric encryption algorithms cater to system confidentiality. IT system security is, however, not achievable through confidentiality alone. System security is typically created only if other system qualities are present as well, such as the content integrity and service availability. And so a bank needs to keep track of these as well to secure its system. It needs to avoid viruses that can corrupt customers' account information, for instance. That's an example for integrity. And it needs to make sure that customer accounts are also available for customers 24/7. So security audits, for security audits, are recognized a trio of value qualities that constitute system security are referred to as CIA principles: confidentiality, integrity, availability. And when Annie, the auditor, sees that encryption is weak, and that the bank hence offers poor confidentiality, This observation can easily influence her expectations on the other value qualities. If it was so easy for an attacker to decrypt customer data, then what would have stopped him or her to alter a deciphered file, corrupt its integrity, re-encrypt and leave the system looking just normal? As Annie mentally plays through the potential security attacks, various value qualities might be in her thought and give her a taste of the overall value fulfillment. Husserl writes that values are experienced through progressive self-giving. To the person who values or evaluates something, progressive self-giving opens up possibilities of deepening his or her experience of something. So Husserl also described how we often have awareness of what is at the back of a thing we initially only see in a two-dimensional surface. So we look at a cup and we just see the surface, and we also know its back part. So the back part progressively gives itself to us. When you take a tetraeder, this is why I take a tetraeder when I describe values, because when you take a tetraeder, you just see the front surface of it, but you still are aware of the fact that this is a three-dimensional object in your hand. And even though we only see one or two qualities, now coming back to the quality illusion, even though we only see one or two quality sides of a thing, at the beginning, we perceive it in its entire solidness. And as we turn it, it progressively gives itself to our visual perception with the other visible sides as well. And the security example shows that there is a difference between the overall value of security and the various distinguishable value quality sides that progressively emerge in our experience. Also like confidentiality, integrity, availability. I could take it and put it and write it on a tetraeder, and as I turn it, I progressively see those different value quality sides. The overall value reveals itself to humans in one unitary experience of various progressively given value qualities. Adding these two metaphysically discernible value layers to the value disposition described above, we find finally a three-layered value ontology. We have value dispositions, value qualities, and the overall ideal value coming together in the phenomenon of human valuation, like in this case, security. And the overall ideal values are often the ones we generically refer to when we speak about ethical or value-based IT systems, but also when we politically refer for something like human values or union values or human rights. And for this reason, the ideal values like security or like certain union values deserve a deeper analysis. So let me speak a bit on ideal values as opposed to these value qualities. Yeah? Ideal values are important for system engineering. Take values beyond security now, such as beauty or knowledge or conviviality. Apple devices set a global benchmark for the beauty of computer systems, which made Apple one of the most valuable companies on earth today. knowledge is a core value we seek in an encyclopedia like Wikipedia. And social networks continue to fuel heated discussions because on the one hand side, they are used by people to feel closer to their community. On the other side, they undermine the same communities through hate, envy, and over-communication. So perhaps it would have been good for a company like Facebook to reflect a bit on the ideal value of conviviality first, before just networking people. In philosophy, ideal values are discerned from real values. Yeah? In his late ethics lectures, the father of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl, explained this distinction. He pointed to the difference between the value of a sonata and the value that an individual might experience when that sonata is played in a concert. Husserl distinguished the ideal value of the sonata itself, which is supertemporal and remains the same in every possible representation, from the real value we temporarily and locally witness when the sonata is played in a concert. The real value is the one perceived by the concert's audience. It is a derivative of the ideal just as much as it is instrumental to the ideal's perception. Let's say we listen to Beethoven's Sonata Opus 2 number 3, a sonata that has been recognized theoretically for its beauty. While the sonata may be theoretically recognized for its ideal beauty, its real beauty depends on a multitude of value qualities and value bearers. One is the pianist, whose clarity and precision of play, as well as the correctness and gentleness of touch, are those interactive qualities needed to unveil the beauty of the piece. Only temporally and locally beauty becomes real in the worldly context and through these qualities. Furthermore, the piano needs to be correctly tuned. Normally, pianists use a grand piano because the volume and the shape of this device, value dispositions, make that the beauty of the piece can come about even more, enabling range and fullness of sound that is not achievable with an ordinary piano. And finally, the pianists and piano's dispositions are coming together with the structure, the pitch, and the sequence of tones in the score. And these value dispositions of the piece itself are responsible for real object qualities like the perceived harmony, ease, and comfort in listening. The example may explain how an ideal value is unveiled through a complex web of real value qualities, which are again backbound to objective dispositions in people and objects. Also ideal values such as beauty are like the invisible vanishing point in a painting. Everything is observed towards it, or everything is ordered towards it, while it itself is invisible. One philosopher who significantly contributed to our understanding of the ideal value sphere and its real materialization was Nikolai Hartmann. In his landmark work on moral philosophy, he detailed the nature of many values, such as the good, the noble, abundance, purity, justice, wisdom, courage, prudence, clarity, honesty, loyalty, trust, humbleness. Also, Hartmann did his PhD on Plato. And probably against this scholarly background, he defined values, as I already said earlier, as principles of the ought to be. Also principles that give us an idea of ideal being that can thereby anchor our own striving. And he argued that values are ideal principles that have a form of being that is ontologically objective, as I already told you earlier. But this objective ideal is not entirely perceivable by human observers. So ideal values, in Hartmann's understanding, are just as Plato's eternal ideas. They are outside of the cave, of our own human cave. Yeah, we humans, according to this cave analogy, are only able to observe shadows of the eternal ideas from the perspective of our own cave. Indeed, if one was to describe an ideal value, such as beauty in its entirety, then this would not be possible. One would find that the real manifestation of this value in music is not only very complex, as we've just seen, but it is also very different from its manifestation in, let's say, visual perception. While I describe the real beauty of a sonata with value qualities like clarity, correctness, precision, and gentleness of touch, range, fullness, etc., beauty in a person comes down to very different qualities. Umberto Eco takes us on a journey in this regard, showing how the taste for symmetry of a person and proportionality of limbs was replaced by naturalness in representation in the Middle Ages, complemented by adornment and splendor in later times. So the real value qualities by which the ideal value, an ideal value like beauty, manifests itself in the world depends on time and context, and at each occasion where we want to understand an ideal value for a concrete context, we must analyze it anew. That said, there may be some recurring quality structures that repeat themselves, some qualities of particular importance to recognize an ideal for a certain period in history. Hartmann himself goes to great lengths explaining how the ideal values listed above, that I mentioned above, may be qualitatively captured. In his moral philosophy, he engages in a practice that has recently been called conceptual value analysis by value-sensitive design scholars. Conceptual value analysis is a second-order analysis we can use in system design to systematically capture and complete what we can know about an ideal value, as what value qualities are available for describing the ideal as completely and precisely as possible in a given context. Let me now speak a little bit about conceptual value analysis and core value clusters. An example that shows how conceptual value analysis can enrich our understanding of an ideal value is Daniel Solov's taxonomy of privacy. Solov analyzed more than a century of US court cases where privacy was legally breached. And this means that negative value qualities materialized, which undermined the privacy ideal, and this was then sanctioned by the courts. For example, being unrightfully surveyed or interrogated, being unwillingly identified, being unfairly excluded from service, being physically intruded upon, being exposed, blackmailed, or distortedly described are all negative value qualities of being that unveil actually to us the value of privacy through its opposite. Now, compare this conceptual framing of privacy with one that we developed in a value-based engineering project with UNICEF in South Africa. The goal of this project was to build a talent platform for African youth, embedding elements of social networking with mentors. In stakeholder discussions, as well as the analysis of the European Data Protection Regulation, containing many privacy-related principles, revealed that privacy on this platform could be optimally protected if platform operations would be made transparent to users, if data sharing was strictly limited to the platform's purpose, if data subjects would be granted self-determination, if data portability and data security were optimized, and so on. So what these two examples show is that the qualities through which an ideal value like privacy expresses itself in the real world comes in very distinct forms and manifestations. It can manifest itself through object qualities such as confidentiality or leeways for person qualities such as self-determination. They can come as enabling qualities like being informed about something or being able to do something, and are due to this diversity of value quality forms, I simply define them as potential manifestations of an ideal value, which are either instrumental to an ideal value or undermine it. And this definition of value qualities is closely aligned with the IEEE 7000's value-based engineering standard. Only that in IEEE 7000, value qualities are called value demonstrators. And the term value demonstrator signals that an ideal value demonstrates itself in the world in a certain way. It shows itself. It becomes real, as Husserl would have probably said. And the two value clusters show that value qualities tend to be of adverbial nature. That is, they signal how something needs to be done, so how a system needs to be set up so that the ideal can be experienced. And privacy does not automatically come into play when someone is identified, but when someone is unrightfully identified. How can privacy be perceived by a user or auditor recognizing how it is secure? Yeah? Ideal values can be, as you see here, visually represented as being at the core of a whole cluster of value qualities or value demonstrators. And for this reason, the IEEE 7000 project members opted to call ideal values also, core values. And a core value is defined as a value that is identified as central in the context of a system of interest. So in the following, I will use the term core value and ideal value interchangeably, and also stick later on to this pragmatic depiction of values in clusters. So the ideal value at the center and the value qualities around them that have been conceptually understood as well as derived from stakeholder dialogues. Let me give you one more example of a value quality cluster. Against the background of the detailed definition and characteristics of values, let's come back to the security example, showing how this ideal core value gives us a notion of the desirable and of the ought to be, but in each real-world context, materializing anew in different value qualities that we can then conceptually pull out. For the bank's IT system, security manifested itself in object qualities such as confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the service. In the context of the UNICEF talent platform, which was about presenting young talents an additional value quality for the use, security became apparent, and that is authenticity. On such a platform, it is important for the members' security to know who they are dealing with and trust that these are real persons, real genuine persons supposed to be there. So authenticity is a fourth value quality dimension that is not necessarily there in a different context like a bank. And now compare this meaning of IT system security with one applicable in a completely different context, such as a refugee camp. In a refugee camp, security would manifest itself for inhabitants in qualities like the lockability or privacy of a sleeping place, the supervision of order by trustworthy guards, or the availability of resources for survival, such as water and food. And the value qualities important here are very different, even though the same name, security, is applied. The security example illustrates that each value-based engineering project needs to understand its own highly context-specific value quality dimensions that are essential to a project at hand. Also, the specific value qualities that the name of a value signals. Even though general frameworks for relevant value qualities exist as useful guidance, such as the CIA principles for security engineering, legal analysis, etc., these are not enough to reliably analyze the real value quality needs of a concrete system of interest. Projects always need to understand, bottom up from stakeholders, what it is that these care for and what qualities manifest value for them. And these then have to be embedded in a system through respective value dispositions. Let me finish by talking a little bit about the constitution of goodness through positive and negative values. The detailed analysis of the privacy and security values show that value qualities can be also negative. Being unwillingly identified or unfairly excluded are two negative ways in which the privacy value can be experienced, or rather a lack thereof. And one could say that the value of privacy, which in its ideal form is always positive and triggers arrows in the observer, is suddenly non-existing. It's absent. And through this absence, negative value is constituted. Also Max Scheler captured this dynamic in the following axiology. The existence of a positive value is itself a positive value. The non-existence of a positive value is itself a negative value. The existence of a negative value is itself a negative value, and the non-existence of a negative value is itself a positive value. Max Scheler did not discern the three elements of the value ontology as clearly as I have done it here, distinguishing between the ideal values, the real value qualities, and the value dispositions enabling these. Applying this nuanced vocabulary to Scheler's axiology, the axiology would actually need to be refined as follows. The existence of positive value qualities constitute positive value. The non-existence or absence of positive value qualities constitute negative values. The existence of negative value qualities constitute negative value, and the existence of a negative value is itself a positive value. Applying this value axiology to the practice of system design and user experience, companies have an interest to build all value dispositions into a system that are needed to ensure the existence of positive value qualities and prohibition of negative value qualities. However, what happens if a system has so many value dispositions in place that only 80% of the value qualities can positively unfold, or negative value qualities be prohibited? Will the ideal value still unveil itself to the user of the system, seeing that 20% of the value qualities potentially relevant for the ideal are missing? And here I think we can turn back to the experience of values through progressive self-giving. The value of privacy will unveil itself up to the point where the observer suddenly recognizes that perhaps one value quality she found important was absent. When this happens, she will doubt the overall ideal being fulfilled. It is for this reason that innovating companies are well advised to test their early prototypes, their early prototypical systems thoroughly, and monitor the actually unfolding of the value clusters in real deployments. Their aim should be to check whether relevant value qualities for the system and the content are absent, or not perceived as they should be, or undermined. And this practice of ensuring the existence of value qualities and thereby ideal values is also what links values to ethics. As Max Scheler completed, he described this as follows: good is the value that is attached to the realization of positive value qualities in the sphere of the willing. And evil is the value that is attached to the realization of negative value or value qualities in the sphere of willing. Thank you very much.